Okay, so this is the promised video on Kant and his critique of Berkeley and idealism. We already went through some of these things in the class, so I'm just going to go over some of the main points. Pages 39 to 45 of the Prolegomena, Kant is going to go over how his own system should not be confused with Berkeleyan idealism. In order to make sense of this, which I think was confusing for a few of you during the class, what you need to keep in mind is that there's going to be two distinct levels at which Kant is working. On one level, he's going to be talking about the transcendental level, and he's going to say, yes, I am a transcendental idealist. At the transcendental level, we can make a distinction between things as they are in themselves, that is, independently of our forms of cognition, and things as they are for us, which he calls appearances. The appearances are going to be subject to our forms of intuition and also to the concepts of our understanding. So in other words, our own cognition is going to be making a contribution to how objects appear to us. And we cannot get away from that. We can't jump over ourselves. So again, on that transcendental level, we have that distinction. All empirical objects, all of the objects of the sciences are appearances, and that means they are subject to our forms of representation, and they are themselves representations. You can think of representations as kind of mental content. They are like ideas. Now, on the other hand, you're going to have another level, which is the empirical level. And one of the reasons why Kant says is he's not a Berkeleyan idealist, is because he thinks, look, Berkeley cannot make this distinction that I am making, and that is, I feel the room feels warm, for instance, or this color looks a particular way to me from the place that I'm standing. Any of those sorts of things that just reference a particular subject would be a judgment of perception. They just, again, have to do with the way that we're perceiving. And he wants to distinguish a judgment of perception from a judgment of experience. A judgment of experience is going to be one where the rules of the understanding have already been employed in order to put together perceptions in such a way that they're put together in accordance with these rules, and that you will get one coherent experience. Okay? And Kant says this is something that Berkeley cannot do. He cannot distinguish between these mere perceptions and these objects of experience. And he's going to say for Berkeley, all of this winds up being a kind of fantastic dream. He cannot distinguish between dream and objective experience. Now, I want to say one more thing in this section from 39 to 45. One of the things that he does say is, look, Berkeley is right. He's going to agree with Berkeley that an idea can only resemble an idea. But that doesn't mean that we do not have any objective experience, because the objects of experience are themselves representations, right? We have no idea of what things in themselves are, but the objects of experience are representations, and so are our perceptions, right? In fact, the objects of experience are going to be the way that they're going to be in a way put together from all of these different perceptions, but organized in a particular way in accordance with these rules of the understanding, right? So you can distinguish between how a particular object appears to you at one given moment, like there's an appearance of this object like this, there's an appearance like this, there's an appearance like this, there's all of these appearings of the object, and yet all of these appearings are put together by the understanding in accordance with a rule, such as we take them as appearings of a single object that appears to us in all of these distinct ways. So there's going to be a transcendental object. He uses this word in different ways, but for now, let's just take it in this way, as the object of experience can be considered transcendental from our particular perceptions, because no given perception is ever going to be adequate to the object of experience. The object of experience, in fact, is just how we construct objects, right, through these rules, given all of these different appearings of an object. And given that there are rules of, causation, there's rules of substantiality, there's rules of the way that objects are constantly influencing one another, right? These are rules for the through which we get a single objective experience, right? We can then sort out, well, why is this appearing in this way? Is this merely an appearance, like the bent stick in water? Why is it merely an appearing? We can give an account of why it's not really bent, and so forth, because we can make those distinctions between the objects of, just our perceptions, right, and the objects of experience. Okay. So again, all of them are representations, and there are going to be, in some sense, you can understand how there is a resemblance between how this appears, right, and the object that I think of this as, this is an appearing of that object, right? Okay. So let's see. I want to then talk a little bit about how he's going to distinguish between objects, between our perceptions, judgments of perceptions and judgments of experience. And this is going to be through the understanding, the categories of the understanding, and how they organize all of this information that is coming to us through the senses. And this is what he's going to be talking about in this next section on the main transcendental questions, second part. And he says again, if nature meant the existence of things in themselves, we would never be able to cognize it either a priori or a posteriori. Not a priori, for how are we to know what pertains to things in themselves, inasmuch as this can never come about through the analysis of our concepts, analytical propositions. Since I do not want to know what may be contained in my concept of the thing, but what would be added to this concept in the actuality of the thing. And we already talked about that. We don't simply want to know what our concepts contain. We want to know something about, objects, right? And that's how we get the synthetic propositions. And the synthetic a priori propositions are going to be synthetic information about objects that comes to us a priori. And what he's going to say is, just as we had the forms of intuition that are a priori, there are also going to be categories of the understanding. These are concepts through which the material is organized, through which there are these rules for bringing together all of the perceptions. And this is how we get natural science. So in the second part, he's going to be talking about these rules of the understanding, and that's how we get natural science. So I'm going to break for now. Okay, so I want to then start talking a little bit more about how natural science is possible. And so we're looking at paragraph 17, and he tells us the formal in nature is in this narrower meaning is therefore the conformity to law of all objects of experience, and insofar as this conformity is cognized a priori, the necessary conformity to law of those objects. So the idea is going to be we cannot know anything about things in themselves. The laws of the understanding that are contributed by the understanding do not apply to things in themselves. They do, however, apply to objects of experience. Um, and it is the fact that the objects of experience are going to be um, conformable to, are in conformity with this law, right? With these laws of the understanding that make it possible for us to have a single experience. And these are a priori necessary laws. As we have seen, one of the issues that we've been looking at is the possibility of knowing a priori that every event has a cause, knowing that there are substances that are independent of our mere perceptions, right? These are going to be these a priori laws. And these a priori laws are going to govern possible experience, what he calls possible experience. So on 48, he says, how is it possible in general to cognize a priori the necessary conformity to law of things as objects of experience? Or how is it possible in general to cognize a priori the necessary conformity to law of experience itself with regard to all of its objects? And the idea is going to be if experience is going to be possible at all, it must be the case that these laws of the understanding are employed. They are that which makes possible a single objective empirical experience. Let's look at paragraph 18. He tells us here, we must therefore first of all note that although all judgments of experience are empirical, that is, have their basis in the immediate perception of the senses, nonetheless, the reverse is not the case, that all empirical judgments are therefore judgments of experience. Rather, beyond the empirical and in general beyond what is given in sensory intuition, special concepts must yet be added, which have their origin completely a priori in the pure understanding, and under which every perception first can be subsumed by then, and then, by means of these same concepts, transformed into experience. Okay, so that is very rich. That is a very rich statement. And what he's saying again is that, for instance, we already saw that Berkeley was very preoccupied with the concept of substance. He says, well, look, we never see the substance. So he says that's just a phantom of the brain because we never see the substance. We only see the qualities that are appearing and given to us in the perceptions. And the same thing, Hume says the same thing, throws out these concepts. And when Kant is saying these concepts, such as this idea of substance, yes, the substance is never seen, it's never given empirically. But we must have such an idea. Picking up where I left off before my son came in the door, the idea is going to be that substance, for instance, obviously we never see the substance. We only see these appearings. But what Kant wants to say is this idea of a substance is necessary. It's a necessary concept supplied by the understanding. So it itself does not come from experience. But we must see the objects that are given to us through the senses. If we're going to have a unitary experience, we must see them, take them as substances, right? And we must take them as substances that are in causal interconnection with other substances. So one substance can affect another substance, and there we again have this idea of cause and effect. These are not notions that come to us through the senses themselves. Remember that we said that Kant says the senses cannot think. These are concepts supplied a priori through from our understanding, which make experience possible. Without them, whatever was coming to us through the senses would just be basically a big blooming mass of confusion. We would just not have a unitary experience. So what he's introducing in this next section is, again, these concepts of the understanding. They do not come from experience, but are supplied by our mind. And then in this next section, in 18, he's going to make this distinction between the empirical judgments, which have what he calls objective validity, and he calls them their judgments of experience. And then again, those judgments that are only subjectively valid, which are going to be judgments of perception. The judgments of perception are just going to be, again, are going to have to do with how things are given to us. So the room feels warm when, when the sun shines, the stone will feel warm. These are all have to do with my own, right, our own, the way that we perceive things. I can feel the room warm, but you can be cold, right? So they're just still relative to the subject. He wants to make a distinction between those judgments of perception and the judgments of experience, which are going to be the judgments regarding objects and everybody would make those same judgments regarding those objects. And so therefore you would be able to have natural science. Let's look at this next sentence here in paragraph 18, which is very interesting. He says, all of our judgments are at first mere judgments of perception. They hold only for us, that is, for our subject, and only afterwards do we give them a new relation, namely to an object, and intend that the judgment should also be valid at all times for us and for everyone else. For if a judgment agrees with an object, then all judgments of the same object must also agree with one another, and hence the objective validity of a judgment of experience signifies nothing other than its necessary universal validity. Okay, so what do we mean when we say that a judgment agrees with an object? Now, the object of experience is basically, we can say that it's a construct. It's constructed from our perceptions in accordance with certain rules. So again, we've seen that we perceive things, first from this angle, then from that angle, right? And we turn it around. It's going to have many different features. And so the issue is going to be, how do we take each of those perceptions and connect them in such a way that what we have, that we can think that we have an object before us, an object that is independent of, right, each of these perceptions, that we can distinguish the object from a perception. So a single perception is never going to be adequate to an object because it's only a single perception. What the object is all of the possible ways in which we can think that it can be perceived in and all of these put together in accordance with certain laws, right? And so therefore we can give an account of the bent stick in water, right? Why is it bent? And what is what the stick actually is like. And again, so he says that these judgments of perception, they need to be put together in such a way that they cohere with an object, right? That they cohere with one in such a way we say, this is why this judgment was perceived this way, right? And we can give an account, right, of why that was the case and why there's an object that stands in relation with that particular perception, right? So these a priori laws, right, are what give us make natural science possible. And of course, natural science is going to be an account, the most general account of these objects of experience. And they depend upon these laws that are of the understanding. We must be able to think of things as substances that exist independently of us. And that again, that every event has a cause. Without that, there would not be any natural science that is possible. That for now, we should have enough material there for you to be able to answer these questions. Once again, these concepts of the understanding are that in virtue of which all of these perceptions are necessarily united, synthesized in such a way we can say that is the object, right? These perceptions belong to that object that exists independently of simply my perceptions. And there is an object that is available to all knowers, right? Each from his or her own perspective. Well, good luck with the final.